Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Today's guest, Mitch Light. This episode sponsored by the Well Coffee House, which is a Nashville area coffee house serving fresh roasted coffee along with its house-made pastries, breakfast and lunch offerings. There are 4 locations to serve you in the Nashville area. Those locations are Brentwood, Green Hills, downtown, and Bellevue. More information can be found at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We also thank our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Today's news sponsored by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in an accident, call Taylor or Russell at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Vanderbilt is seeking input from the university community as it develops its athletics strategic plan. It wants your input. You may go to viewcommodores.com and submit your comments there. Our guest line, presented by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on Boll & Branch sheets for years. They are phenomenally comfortable. Had no idea what I was missing until I got them. You can try them as well. Get them for a month. You can return them for free, but you won't want to. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy. Get $50 off your first set of sheets. And remember, these are fair trade certified. That means they're made under safe conditions by men and women who were treated and paid fairly. Mitch Light joins us now. He is the executive editor at Athlon Magazine. He is also the sideline reporter for Vanderbilt football. Mitch, thanks for joining us. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well, Chris, and I had no choice because I told you we do this every Monday, and I'm a man of my word, so I've got no choice but to be here talking to you.
You are always a man of your word.
I try. So, no, happy to be here, happy to talk with you every week.
You're like the Cal Ripken of podcasting.
Something like that. Yes, thank you.
Well, let's talk football. I know Vanderbilt did not have a game this weekend, which probably afforded you the opportunity to watch a little bit more of other teams than you usually do. Tell us what stuck out or what stood out to you this weekend.
Enjoyed the Kentucky-Florida game. I watched almost that entire game. Kentucky I thought was impressive. Sawyer Smith was solid for the most part, made some bad, committed some bad turnovers. Watching that game, you got the impression that Kentucky was the better team that day. But obviously once Franks went out for whatever reason, Trask seemed to ignite them and came back and just a horrible missed field goal. Felt bad for that kid. As a fan of college football, I feel really bad for kickers who miss kicks. And, I know everyone on Twitter loves to make fun of college kickers and stuff like that. But I felt bad for him. So, I think the SEC East with all the quarterback, you got 3 teams losing their quarterbacks for the season. I think that's more of a mess more of a jumbled mix than ever. I mean, I think Florida's the second best team. After that, I'm not sure. Missouri's looked good at times, not good at times. Tennessee, obviously 2 bad losses, 1 win over a bad team. Kentucky's looked pretty good, probably. Vanderbilt, we still don't know. Obviously the Georgia game went as expected. Purdue, not so much. Speaking of Purdue, obviously TCU goes up there and dominates them. Elijah Sindelar did not play. And, Gary Patterson for TCU going against a first-time starter at quarterback as a freshman probably went as expected. Purdue's inability to run the ball keeps being a problem, and TCU did a great job on Ronald Moore, held him to 3 catches, tied a career low there. So those are a couple games that I watched, and I'm trying to bounce around. USC, disappointing loss for them after looking so good to win at Stanford. Hey, Stanford has just fallen off a cliff. They're passing deep. Against the pass, their numbers last 2 weeks against true freshman quarterbacks at USC and UCF have been horrendous. And that program's kind of been on a slow, trending in the wrong direction for several years. Quite frankly, the defense has not been very good since Derek Mason left. And Pac-12 it looks like Utah and everyone else right now. So just some stream of consciousness thoughts right there.
Yeah, the Stanford game, I was watching that. I was in Wyoming. I'll get to that in a little bit. But that game was, 21-0 after 3 UCF possessions? Was that right?
Yeah, 38-7 at the halftime. Dylan Gabriel, another true freshman from Hawaii, for like Mackenzie Milton for UCF, really played well. And they've got some serious athletes on that team.
Kentucky, Florida. I think your answer is probably going to be you're not sure. That's my answer. And for Florida, that question I'm about to ask is compounded by the fact that its quarterback is out for the year. But what do you make of either of those teams right now?
Florida's offensive line continues to be an issue. They didn't run the ball well. Michael P. Ryan, I don't have it in front of me, but it was 13 carries for 30 yards, nothing great there. Kentucky seems to be pretty good at, on the offensive line. Smoke's a good running back. Rose is a good running back. They looked, pretty good, quite frankly, in that game. And they had two solid wins over solid MAC teams to open up the season, Eastern Michigan and Toledo. It's just so difficult. And I was just sorry, my other line's ringing here. I was just, talking about this on the Cover 2 podcast I did with Braden Gall. It's so dangerous in college football to try and figure out what's going on, especially early in the season from week to week. I mean, West Virginia looked like one of the worst offensive teams in the country. Gets shut out of Missouri, 14 points against James Madison, and then they go and they blow out NC State, put up a big number. I always refer to this because last year, I think you'd agree, we saw Notre Dame. I saw Notre Dame in South Carolina in back-to-back weeks in person. I thought South Carolina was the better team. They dominated Vanderbilt, the line of scrimmage, won that game easily. Vanderbilt goes up to South Bend, plays poorly early, but by all accounts, could have, should have won that game. And then South Carolina goes on and is very mediocre, and Notre Dame's a top 10 team. So sometimes it's matchups. I don't know if Kentucky's just been matching up well with Florida, because not only did they beat them last year, they have been very, very competitive with them. In fact, they've figured out ways to lose against Florida in recent years. So I guess my rambling point is, Kentucky has looked really good so far. I don't know if it's a matchup thing with Florida or if they're just good. I mean, they're good on the line of scrimmage. We'll find out, but I wouldn't read too much into that game.
Yeah, the SEC East has an interesting little merry-go-round involving South Carolina, Kentucky, because Kentucky always beats South Carolina, even though South Carolina is usually the better team, and Florida always beats Kentucky with the exception of last year. And, sometimes you've seen Florida, South Carolina, those have had some really interesting games in the past, but just goes to your point that sometimes I think maybe we underrate matchups because some teams, and Vanderbilt, Tennessee, another example, it seems like some teams just play exponentially better against others.
Yeah, and it's also when you play them too. It's just time of the year, health, bye week, all that stuff. So, I follow college football very closely. I know a lot about personnel, but trying to figure out who's going to win each week is a crapshoot.
Do you make anything of Tennessee shutting out UTC? I usually don't make anything of those kind of games, but I thought with Tennessee, that's a team that I thought maybe had the potential to start packing it in. The fact that it showed up focused enough to shut out another team, granted, not a good team, but does that mean anything to you?
No, not really. I mean, you think about those rosters, and I mean, you could say the same thing about Georgia State to some degree, but every player on the Tennessee roster should be considerably better than every player on the Chattanooga roster. I'm looking at their scores. Chattanooga was 1-1 before this. They beat Eastern Illinois, and they lost to Jacksonville State 41-20. I think it helped Tennessee that it got up to a good start. They scored in the first possession and blocked a punt and got up, and then when you're really struggling, you're 0-2. You're looking for the reasons not to quit. That's too strong of a word, but I think you could tell early whether or not you're going to be in a dogfight or whether or not this game is going to be easy. And once you're up 14-0, I think you start playing with a lot more confidence, and they kind of get their swagger back there. So, obviously winning that game, whatever it was, 45-0 is better than a tight game, but I didn't read too much into it.
On the subject of games that involved SCS teams, what in the world is up at Georgia Tech?
They're just not well. They're not very good, and with the transition, they've been a triple option program for 12 years, and Jeff Collins comes in, and they don't want to run the option, but they've got option quarterbacks. Their offensive line's a mess. So this was, I thought they'd be one of the worst Power 5 teams in the country before the season, and they did beat South Florida, who's not very good, but Furman's. Citadel is a solid FCS program, but not a great one. Obviously it's a surprise whenever that happens, but not a surprise Georgia Tech struggling.
Speaking again of teams that are in the FBS, I went to Wyoming this weekend to see my nephew play. People want to where Idaho has dropped down to FCS, and Wyoming got more of a scare than I think any of us anticipated. Boy, you talk about, again, week to week how things change. Watching Wyoming this weekend, I would have, if you'd said, okay, they played Missouri and you don't know what happened, I would have said Missouri wins that game by 30 easily after watching Wyoming Saturday. But, of course, you know what happened.
Yeah, that perfect example. And Idaho gave up 79 points to Penn State and couldn't stop anything. And then Penn State scores 14 or whatever they scored against Pitt last week. So it's crazy. I mean, it really is. And, Wyoming's, they've been you probably know more about them than I do, but they've been a good defensive program. They've struggled to score. That's what made the Missouri score so surprising. If you would have told me Wyoming would beat Missouri 10-3, that's one thing. But the fact that Wyoming scored 37 points in that game was shocking.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of complaints about Vanderbilt's offense, and a lot of those are very fair. But, boy, if you don't like Vanderbilt's right now, you would really hate Wyoming's. They cannot complete a pass. They were 4 of 12, and that allowed Idaho to stay in the game. But talk about boring offenses. I saw one up close and personal this weekend.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of the way they've been since that Craig Bohl's been there, and I guess before that too, they've been struggling on offense. Good defensive team. He's an old Nebraska guy from back in the day. So I like Wyoming's uniforms. I'll say that
they are very cool. And my son actually has got my nephew's uniform now. He gave him his jersey top from last year, which I guess you get a couple of them a year. So he wore that proudly at the stadium Saturday. Which, by the way, it was 73, but it's so hot up there. I guess in the altitude, it's for whatever reason, it's a little hotter, especially when there's no clouds. But it was the hottest 73 to 75 I've ever been in.
Well, it's cool that you got out there. Where you try and go to one game a year or so?
Well, I usually try to see him once or twice a year. Last year, I didn't get to go up there because of Vanderbilt. But so this is my first time actually to see a game on Wyoming's campus. In fact, first time I've been to that campus, period. And I did see them play last year. Missouri, of course, hosted Wyoming, so we drove to that one. And we're going back up for the Colorado State game, which will cause me to miss ETSU here in town. But
gotcha.
So that's fun. I
know the dean of the University of Wyoming Law School.
All right. Well,
I'm going to tell you, he was a former interesting story. Well, let's get sidetracked. He's I used to coach basketball with him. He's my son Gabe's friend's dad. They moved out there. He was Steve Spurrier's. He was from Gainesville High School, I believe. Steve Spurrier's first recruit at Duke, first commitment, quarterback at Duke for 2 years, and then didn't play much. Sat behind Dave Brown, was it, future Giants quarterback, and then transferred, finished his career at Yale. So, but that's his claim to fame, as he was Steve Spurrier's first commitment at Duke.
Wow, that's a pretty neat claim to fame. Well, I mean, speaking of Wyoming, I think Vanderbilt, of course, have got a lot of facilities renovations and things to be discussed. That was an interesting situation to watch because my nephew took me through their facilities after the game. And, of course, Wyoming is, I think, the least populated state, at least in the contiguous 48. I don't know if Alaska's got more people or not. I think it does. But it was interesting because they are a relatively small state school, but I thought their facilities in their stadium were really well done. Now, I don't know that Vanderbilt could do a stadium like that without building another one because it's 2 tiers, but I felt that really alleviated a lot of the congestion, and the facilities, man, were super, super nice. They have this big building behind an open end zone that you walk in, and it just seems like it goes for days, but they put a lot of time and effort in that, I'm sure with more limited resources. But I thought, hey, that's an example of one done without unlimited resources that turned out really well.
Yeah, I obviously haven't seen them. I've seen the stadium on TV several times, and I think maybe you tweeted something about it. So, yeah, it looked like a nice stadium.
Did you ever hear, I didn't know about this until I was up there. Have you ever heard of the Black 14 at Wyoming?
Rings a bell, but maybe not.
Well, I did not know about this story. It was a terrific story. Wyoming was, I guess, set to play BYU 50 years ago. And, of course, the Mormon church didn't used to allow, I don't know if it was all minorities or whatever in the church. I think that policy has since changed. Well, obviously it has. But anyway, Wyoming was set to play BYU, and they had a group of 14 black players who wanted to wear armbands just to protest that church's policy, which at the time, it was different time and everything. But the way a lot of places handle those things at times was they just squelched it. And so the coach basically said, if you guys want to keep up your demand, you'll be kicked off the team, and that's exactly what happened. But anyway, they honored, I think, 10 of the 14 came back this week, and a couple were deceased. One of them, he was deceased, but his son came, and one had to cancel at the last minute. It was a really neat ceremony before that game. They honored those 14 players before the game, and Alan Simpson, who is a prominent politician, has been a senator up there for forever, gave the speech and basically issued an apology. But it's a really neat kind of thing.
Yeah, that is cool. In fact, there's so much good writing out there, so many outlets. There's not a lot of untold stories, but that seems like a pretty good untold story.
Yeah, it was. It was one that I was not aware of. But anyway, let's I guess let's just move on to the mailbag. There's really no football to discuss because Vanderbilt hadn't played in a couple of weeks, and we talked about it last week. I'm just going to go on into the mailbag, and we'll hit the topics that the listeners want to talk about. Our mailbag is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan Josh Minton, an independent insurance agent operating out of Brentwood. If you're looking for a one-stop shop to take care of your needs, Josh has you covered. Call him today, 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Twitter at Joshua Minton HQ or at Facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my insurance agent. Give him a try. Give him a call. Get an estimate or a quote for your insurance. You have nothing to lose, and tell him you heard about it on the podcast. Mr. Vandy wants to know, is there any update on the injury situation that you can share?
No, not that I know of. And, I've said, I don't mean to be a poor guest, but, certain things that I do know that I'm just not supposed to talk about privy to certain information. But I have not been over there this week, so I didn't even see any practices or anything like that. So, I'm trying to think anything, coming off who missed that game. This is 100% conjecture. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Devin Cochran played this week. He was, like we talked about, he was on the trip, was not in uniform last week. My guess is Javion Marlowe. So I guess I am sort of giving an update, but this is just on conjecture. Javion Marlowe would play. It would also be my guess this week. I don't know about Frank Coppett, safety, as we talked about last week. Obviously you want more good bodies, but at least Jerkins he's played well in reserve there. I know they like their depth in secondary. So if I miss anyone that didn't play,
let's go through.
You go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it might be easier just go through area. Offensive line, of course, Cochran has been out the first two games. If he's not back for LSU, I bet he will be back for Northern Illinois. So there's that. Sage Young is just perpetually banged up. I'm trying to think, was there anybody else on the offensive line who's missed any time? Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. I'm in the dark on that one, too.
Yeah, I don't know.
Running back, Wakefield, I guess, is done for a while. Marlowe, as you mentioned, I guess he's going to play. I think that's it there. Quarterbacks, they're fine. Receivers and tight ends, I don't remember. Well, Amir Abdul-Rahman has been hurt, missed the last game.
I don't.
So don't know the situation there. Defensive side of the ball, on the line, I think they're pretty healthy, aren't they?
As far as I know.
Yeah, linebacker Falete Afamui missed the Purdue game. I think that's all he's going to miss, probably. Colin Anderson just can't seem to get well. Are we missing anybody out of that group?
I don't believe so.
And in defensive backs, Coppett is going to be out. I don't know if it'll be Saturday, but could be. And then I think other DBs, I can't think of anybody else being hurt to any degree. Can you?
No. I'm just I don't have the roster in front of me. I should have opened it up. But no, I don't think so.
And one more I missed on linebacker, Kenny Hebert has been hurt, but I think he played. Did he not play with a cast on his hand at Purdue?
He played. He got hurt in the Georgia game. They put a cast on him. He came back in the game, got banged up again, but he played. I think he started. I'm not 100% sure, but he definitely played a decent amount of snaps against Purdue.
I think that's all that I remember right now, and not to make excuses. They've not played very well, but I think that this early in the year, this is about as banged up as I remember a Vanderbilt team in a while.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the one that really hurts the offensive line, just because you needed all hands on deck and create some chemistry with so many moving parts there. So, as we've said, obviously the Saturday is going to be a huge test, but it's the next month after that where we'll find out if this is a bowl worthy team.
Next question from Conluck. Any word on Malik Langham?
No, I haven't heard. That's one where they're keeping it close to the vest. I think we'll either, if he is eligible, I don't even know if they'll announce it. He might just be in uniform on Saturday and play. But at some point, now he's already redshirted, so he can't get another year back. So I guess if at some point the NCAA has got to they've got to make their decision one way or the other at some point. So this is only Vanderbilt's third game, but it's the fourth week of the season. So for all I know, he's either been ruled eligible, he's been practicing this week, or he's not, but I have no information on that.
So that's an interesting observation about the red shirt, which he has used, as you said. But, I mean, so basically, does he have to burn a red shirt even if he doesn't play?
Yeah. I mean, you only get 5 years barring exception. So he redshirted at Florida last year. And so that's the thing about the reason that Moyer's eligibility in basketball, Matthew Moyer granted eligibility was such a big deal because he had already redshirted. So, if a guy transfers and, as a freshman and plays as a freshman, if he's granted immediate eligibility, that's great. If not, he'll just use that as a red shirt. It doesn't affect. But Moyer had already redshirted and then played a year. So he was only going to have 3 years at Vanderbilt regardless. So the fact that he was ruled eligible was a big deal because he was able to play one of those years. Same thing, right, in this situation with Langham. Barring a 6th year down the road, he has 4 years at Vanderbilt because he spent 1 at Florida, which he's already redshirted. So if he's not granted immediate eligibility, he will play as a sophomore, junior, senior. If he is, then he can play this year as a redshirt freshman.
My personal opinion would be NCAA incompetence ought to be ground for an extra year. I mean, come on. How many other schools in the country are dealing with this right now?
Yeah, I mean, I follow this stuff, and I can't think of another one that hasn't been resolved. So again, Vanderbilt might know about this and just haven't announced it, but there's a decent amount of guys that get a 6th year. Usually, it's if you've been hurt twice. But did he get hurt last year at Florida? I know he played. If he got hurt at Florida and then didn't play, then he has a much better chance of getting a 6th year if he wants it.
Yeah, I don't think he played. Period. I could be wrong.
Thought he played.
Maybe he did.
I thought he played a game or two.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess he could have because now that redshirt policy,
right?
You kind of get a pass for anything under 5 games. But I don't get it. I don't understand. I mean, with all the hundreds of millions of dollars pouring through the NCAA's coffers, just hire another eligibility person if you're that understaffed. There's no reason this should take that long.
Yeah, Malik Langham played in 2 games last year for Florida.
Okay, well then. Tell the NCAA you got a hangnail, Malik.
Yeah, Charleston Southern and Idaho. So.
Yeah. Anyway, Conluck wants to know, he has a question about whether Derek Mason would change, I guess, any philosophies or schemes going forward.
I doubt it. I mean, defensively, I think they're pretty multiple. They're base 3-4, I guess, but they run so much nickel. I'm not sure scheme's the issue right now. Just got to play better. Offensively, they kind of are what they are right now. So I don't really know how to answer that question. I mean, I don't think he's going to the option. I don't think he's, making wholesale, defensive philosophical changes.
I did think read pass option would be more a part of their offense than we have seen. It seemed like they tried it a couple plays in the Georgia game and just sort of went away from it.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed, Riley Neal doesn't seem to be as nimble as I expected. I'd like to go back and look. For a guy that rushed for 1,500 yards in 3 years at Ball State, I thought he'd be a little more fleet of foot.
That may be one of those cases where he's right on that margin where you get a half step on MAC defenders and you're a half step slow against the ones at the Power 5 and SEC level.
Could be the case, yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's my best explanation, barring another one. View Superior says, Deuce Wallace looked pretty ineffective in the short time he was in the Purdue game. How much do you think Vanderbilt leans on Alan Walters and or Ken Seals next season?
Oh, I would think Deuce would be have every opportunity to win the job and hold on to the job. I don't think you want to barring. I know there's a lot of true freshmen playing college football, but most of those guys are 5 stars and they're kind of ready made. If Seals comes in and proves he's capable, that's one thing. But I'd be very surprised if Deuce Wallace is not the starter for most of next year. And I'm sure they'll be in the market for a grad transfer. There is a gap there, with losing Jacob Free and then the freshman who transferred this year. So Alan Walters right now, the fact that he's fourth string, I don't think bodes well. But guys can improve.
Yeah, Walters was nowhere near ready as fall camp broke, from what I have seen and heard. So I think that they're going to want somebody with seniority, which means it's either going to be Deuce's job or they get another grad transfer. I agree with you that I don't think they're going to probably hand it over to either of those two guys right away. 96 Store says, what are your early impressions of the new starting quarterbacks for Kentucky, South Carolina, and Florida? I know you touched on those teams a little bit, but go a little bit more in depth on those particular quarterback situations, if you would, please.
Yeah, Helinski's pretty good at South Carolina. I mean, he was really highly rated kid coming, everyone, if you follow college football, his story with his brother at Washington State. His first start was against an FCS team, I think Charleston Southern, so no big surprise, put up big numbers there. I thought he did a pretty good job. I probably watched about half that game. I came home, I missed the first quarter, and then when it got out of hand, I stopped watching. But playing against Bama, I thought he played with some decent points. They had some big plays there, so I think he's a good quarterback. Sawyer Smith at Kentucky's fine. I mean, he's not a difference maker. He doesn't beat you with his legs, obviously, like Wilson did. He like I mentioned earlier, he had some bad mistakes, which I don't know if it's nerves or whatever, or just making bad decisions. He did some good things during his career at Troy when he was in there, so. I think he's fine. I don't think, like I said, not a big difference maker. And Trask really sparked him. I think he's a solid, sort of like Sawyer Smith's probably a better player. He's been there. He's a fifth-year senior, I believe. He's kind of, in this era when so many guys leave and grad transfer, he's had an opportunity to grad transfer and stayed behind. So I think Franks probably has more upside than Trask, but Trask might be a little steadier.
I want to flip topics on you for just a minute here and talk about a thing that went down in the NCAA last week. Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander covered it very well on their Eye on College Basketball podcast. Do you have any thoughts on the ruling in California where basically that state has said, we're trying to usurp the NCAA, and if a kid has an opportunity to make money off his likeness or image, we're going to allow them to do that, and we're going to put language into the law that does not allow the NCAA to overturn that. I didn't know. I mean, you're busy sometimes with your own thing. I don't know if you got a chance to follow it, but that story went completely under the radar on our board. And Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander spent a good 40 or 45 minutes talking about that on their podcast, which I thought was very good.
Yeah, I'll listen to that. I listen to the podcast quite a bit. I think it's going to end up being much ado about nothing because I think that rule does not come into effect until 2023, and I think the NCAA is moving in that direction anyway, and I think there'll be some sort of NCAA legislation that will allow that maybe right before that comes into law in California. So I think we're moving in that direction as a, despite what Tim Tebow says, I think most rational people believe that, hey, understand maybe paying these guys. There's a lot of different opinions on this, but paying these guys is very difficult because there's, opens the floodgates and all that stuff. I get that. So the next best thing is let guys to be able to profit from their likeness or image, which I think most people think is okay. Obviously, that opens up to some other issues that I know fans will say, oh, the Alabama car dealer is going to pay these guys $20,000 to, for their autograph. Well, that stuff's probably going on anyway under the table. And most people like money. Like boosters aren't just going to be handing out random money, to just random players. I mean, the star guys, if you're really marketable, you're going to make money. But I think people will also find out that a lot of these athletes aren't as marketable as people think. Each team has a few, each school has some, but what's a random wide receiver at South Carolina really going to get on the open market? I don't think much.
Yeah, and Gary Parrish said it really well. He said, I think that whatever happens, if you flip forward 10 years in recruiting rankings, he said that same teams that are winning recruits
Sure.
now are going to be the same ones that win it then. But it just makes everything above board, and it does give an honest guy a chance to compete. So a guy out there who is trying to abide by the rules, I think, benefits by this.
Yeah, I mean, what's the harm if there's a restaurant off of Charlotte or West End that wants to pay Keyshawn Vaughn $500 to, appear in a TV ad or appear in a print ad for them or something? Who's that hurting? Nobody. So, I agree with what Gary said. The power programs are going to get the top players under any system.
And he had one comment in there, too. He said the NCAA does this under the guise of, quote unquote, protecting the student athlete. And they're like, no, they do it under the guise of, I think they talk about how the economics could get out of control. It's like, well, these schools already have enough to where you can get paid at a top level college basketball or football program more than you do in the professional counterparts. He said that's like the only area where the economics hasn't trickled down is to the players. And this is just nothing more than the NCAA trying to protect that. So,
yeah. And I'm not a pay the players guy, but I would have no problem with that.
Yeah, and again, it's not going to affect most people. That's why it wouldn't bankrupt the NCAA, and it's allowing forces outside your internal control, locus of control. Now, where it will affect them is you'll have boosters that'll start giving that money to players rather than to facilities or scholarships, and that's what the NCAA is really upset about.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. They've got their amateurism model, and that doesn't really fall under the umbrella of amateurism.
Anything else in the realm of college sports worth talking about? Any tidbits from baseball or basketball? I did have somebody send me a picture of Kumar Rocker, I think, for a photo shoot where it looked like he'd slimmed down a good bit. I thought that was sort of interesting. But in a week where Vanderbilt's off and is 0-2 coming into that, there's a little bit of a lack of material. So I was just going to, before we close, give you the chance to get anything else out there that might be interested to our audience.
Not really. I'm sorry. I wish I had, something interesting to say, but I got, even fall baseball is opening up later. I guess the news out that Vanderbilt will be playing Michigan. That'll be fun. It'll be cold, but it'll be fun. And that, that trip to, I guess they're taking a day trip to Kansas City to play Oklahoma State. So Tim Corbin playing two of his former assistants. But other than that, Chris, not really.
I was thinking about this last week. Vanderbilt's to the point now where it could form a rotation just of its former pitchers that would be a pretty good one. I mean, you've got Walker Buehler, you got David Price, you got Sonny Gray. I'm missing somebody. Drew Verhagen's in there. I guess he could be your five. And I feel like I'm missing Mike. Oh, of course, Mike Minor is having a terrific year. You could at this point field a 5-man rotation just of former Vanderbilt pitchers. It's one of the best in baseball.
Yeah, and the fun thing this year has been the emergence, obviously, of Brian Reynolds and Mike Yastrzemski, because I always look those guys up in box scores and stuff like that. And following pitching is fine, but this is really Dansby obviously came up a few years ago, but Pedro had a couple good years, but there haven't been a ton of everyday fielders, position players coming from Vanderbilt. So that's obviously changing. So that's made it even more fun to follow those guys.
Yeah, if you wanted to field a 9, you could go Casale at catcher. You could probably play Flaherty at third, Swanson at short. You could go Kemp at second, Reynolds and Yastrzemski in the outfield. And I know I'm missing somebody. There's an outfielder and a first baseman missing.
Yeah, I'm trying to think.
I don't think they have any first baseman. I guess you could play Flaherty there and find somebody to play third.
Get Pedro. Is Pedro still playing in the minor? I think last year.
He's done. I think he's done.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you could bring Pedro out of retirement and play him at third.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could promote J.J. Bleday to the bigs and maybe put him in right, and he could probably hold his own better than some other guys. But anyway, that was just kind of an interesting thing. I thought, boy, they're to the point where you could form an all-Vandy rotation and win with it and probably win big. But well, Mitch, we'll have a lot more to talk about next week. In the meantime, fans can fight the boredom by buying a copy of Athlon College Basketball Magazine, which I have. Thank you very much for sending me that. And tell people where they can pick that up.
Newsstands pretty much everywhere, but are on our website, athlonsports.com/store.
And your Twitter handle?
Oh, Athlon Mitch.
He is Mitch Light. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We'll be back with more later in the week.